would like to give a speech to Mr. Saber Azam, who is the regional representative and the regional coordinator for Central Asia of UNHCR. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. Please bear with me. When this morning I woke up, first of all, when I saw the snow, I said, oh my God, I have to be much ahead of time. So one surprise. Second surprise, the day I don't have my voice, the microphone doesn't function. So please bear with me. And if you don't hear me, raise your hand and I will try to increase a bit the volume of my voice. It's really a great pleasure to be in front of you again. This is the second time I'm in KIMEP, and I have met some of you earlier. And I really would like to thank the organizers for having given me a chance to be here again. Before starting speaking about the subject, I really would like to acknowledge the very useful and fundamentally interesting idea of having what we call the Model United Nations. I know it's not only in Almaty, this type of exercise is applied elsewhere too, but this is really relevant. The second thing I really would like to acknowledge is the extraordinary role of Kazakhstan universities in providing really world-class future responsibles for the country. I have the pleasure to work with some of the graduates of Kazakh universities, particularly from KIMEP, and I should say that they are really very, very much international standard, and the quality of education is extraordinary. Sometimes I'm asking whether you really need to go abroad to get higher and further education, but that's up to you. And the third issue I really would like to acknowledge is the collaborative approach of, I understood, 7 universities and institutions to come together and discuss about Model United Nations. I would not like to elaborate on the United Nations. You have done so much studies. You have definitely gone to the site and you know what is the General Assembly, you know how the UN is composed. But let me, just one point which is really important, and quite often I'm requested and I'm asked question, is the United Nations still relevant? Is it still relevant? It was created more than 60 years ago, and you know, like all human beings, is this organization now an old entity? Is it still relevant? And the answer is yes. Not because I'm representing a branch of the United Nations, but I would like to do a similarity, just compare the laws, I mean social and human laws with scientific laws. Take physics, take chemistry. I mean, all of us have done some physics courses or some chemistry courses in mathematics. In mathematics or in physics, you go in Bhutan, you go into the United States, you go in France, you go in Barbados, laws are the same. Scientists will speak of the same language. But that's not the case when you discuss about social science. Values are different from one part of the world to the other part of the world. Therefore, you need a body. You need a body to establish universal laws, universal approaches on what we call on human behavior. And this is why the United Nations is relevant. The United Nations will still remain relevant until we find something which would be more modern. But I'm also glad that the United Nations is going through the reform process, making the organization modern. Therefore, it is not a sort of obsolete organization. And if somehow the United Nations is obsolete, then it's because of member states, and we come back to that. The most important relevance of the United Nations, I just highlight a few areas. Peace and security in the world. How do you see peace and security, or how different governments would see peace and security? Of course, South Sudan would not see peace and security the same way as North Sudan. Or of course, countries who are in conflict with each other would not see peace and security in the same manner. Take India and Pakistan. They don't see the peace and security in Kashmir in the same manner. So you need to establish universal approaches. You need to have this in the form of resolution, in the form of whatever you want. You basically guide different countries that, well, you may have your own standard, but this is what is the universal standard in maintaining peace and security in the world. Human rights, a very, very crucial topic. Some people say human rights is like a knife with double edge. But you need principles, you need fundamentals, you need values to which you have to hook. It's like a parachute. You're flying from 10,000 or 11,000 meters. You need a parachute just to keep your standards, to keep your values. And therefore, when human rights are violated, you need an international body to intervene and say to the states, well, wait a minute, there is something wrong with what you do. Humanitarian affairs. Well, let me first of all say with social and economic development, the famous Millennium Goal. You all know the 8 Millennium Goals. Is this universal body established principles, standards that all people on earth should have a minimum standard of social and economic welfare. This is important to establish those norms and standards. We say, unfortunately, when the Millennium Goals were developed, nobody thought of humanitarian affairs, and therefore there is less of humanitarian affairs in the Millennium Goals. And therefore, I would like to put humanitarian affairs also as a very crucial task that the United Nations is carrying over. Wars are everywhere, unfortunately. Probably states confront each other less. Today we have unknown entities and unknown structures that fight states or fight others, and therefore conflict is always ongoing. Someone was telling me, look, conflict is in our genes. When God created Adam and Eve, and then the first generation, Abel and Cain fought each other. I think one killed the other one. So it's in us, it's in human beings. Let's be realistic. So I think as long as we are on earth, we may face conflict. Nature is also the same way. Always the mighties dominate the weak ones, and therefore the weak ones could resist. So therefore, it's very important to tackle the issue of humanitarian affairs, and I'm coming to that because I'm glad that you have what we call a simulation of how the UNHCR Executive Committee would work. And then, of course, the international justice. International justice is something that the United Nations is taking more and more over. I mean, we saw all Milosevic being tried, we saw Karadzic, we saw Mladic, we saw Charles Taylor. These are some of the very big and notorious criminals that their own states cannot judge because of quite a number of impediments, and therefore international justice should take over. So from what you see, the United Nations system acts not properly, but somehow a little bit like a world country. You have a legislative body, which is the General Assembly. You will be representing different countries, your countries in the General Assembly. You will be passing resolutions on how to prevent genocide. This is great. It's like all resolutions of the General Assembly could be similar to laws that you pass in the Assembly. You have the executive body, which is the Office of the Secretary General, and the different organizations which could be similar to ministries in a government. UNHCR could be similar to a World Ministry of Refugees and Internally Displaced Persons and Stateless People. WHO could be similar to the World Ministry of Health, and so on. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you have the justice system, the three organs of a state: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Now, I think I would not elaborate on the General Assembly. As I mentioned, this is the body which could be similar to the Parliament of the world. But what is the advantage of General Assembly? Every country big, small, with 1 billion population or over 1 billion population, or a country with 4 million inhabitants, they all have the same vote. And that's the difference. Because in Almaty, you have more representatives than another oblast with less population. But that is also the principle of equality which has been established from the essence in the United Nations. But we will come back later on, and I would like to be honest with you and also mention some challenges. I think this is really important. So with your permission, and taking into account that you know, I had only 15 minutes, and in 15 minutes you cannot cover a lot, I will pass from General Assembly to the UNHCR Executive Council. This is probably less known to you because it is probably, we don't speak so much often about it. From the 193 countries that compose the General Assembly, 85 of them compose the UNHCR Executive Committee. The UNHCR Executive Committee is the body which basically dictates what UNHCR should do. It's not the High Commissioner who decides. It is the executive body of UNHCR which basically says to UNHCR where UNHCR should intervene. But what is UNHCR? I had this discussion with one of my big High Commissioners, who was a former Prime Minister of Netherlands, who became High Commissioner. And we were in a discussion, and the discussion got a bit heated. And then he asked me, do you know what UNHCR stands for? Of course, UNHCR stands for the World Refugee Body, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. UNHCR's mandate is derived from the Charter of the United Nations, the Fundamentals of Human Rights, its own charter, as well as the 1951 Convention and other conventions that it comes. Initially, UNHCR was established to deal with the situation of refugees in Europe. In the mandate of the agency was 3 years. We thought that we will solve the problem of refugees in 3 years' time, and then we will ask UNHCR to close the offices. But then unfortunately, and as I mentioned, conflict after conflict, conflict after conflict led to displacement. And therefore, UNHCR relevance was confirmed that this agency is needed to be there. So then the mandate was extended every 5 years by General Assembly. And then lately it was decided that, well, we cannot come to the end of refugee and displacement problems. Therefore, this agency should remain like any other agency within the United Nations system.